Hello, Candice. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to interview you for the Jubilee Center web. You have done research with us in the past, and your collaborative work with social scientists on various issues related to character and virtues is closely related, obviously, to our interest in the Jubilee Center. And I'm sure also related to the interest of many of the people who are watching this recording. So my initial question to you is this: you have a distinguished position as a professor of philosophy in a highly ranked mainstream philosophy department at the University of Chicago. But unlike most mainstream philosophers, you have engaged considerably with social scientists, psychologists, and economists. So could you tell us something about your background and how this interest in cross-disciplinary work came about?
I mean, the cross-disciplinary interest goes way, way back, and it basically emerges from a conviction that if a question is worth thinking about, it's worth thinking about in more than one way. And so the cross-disciplinary work I've done has involved learning how to formulate and think central and important questions in more than one way. So that's really how it started. I think that my first cross-disciplinary interest was actually inside philosophy, and it was a cross-disciplinary interest between analytic and continental philosophy, which is sort of a big divide. And I pursued both as a doctoral student, but also as a doctoral student, I became aware of the centrality of economic models of rationality to moral theory and thoughts about moral reasoning, and to policy making, and to political philosophy. So I spent a year on leave from philosophy department doing research in formal economics in our economics department at the University of Pittsburgh, which jokingly means that my one formal training session in social science was basically math, mathematics. But I got a lot from that year. And the interest in psychology sort of grew up over the course of working with you all and working on a big Templeton project that involved a disciplinary cross with a lot of psychologists, which is how the education interest got more fully fleshed out.
Okay, so you mentioned these economic models, and that sort of relates to my second question, which is about the course you have been teaching in the economics department at Chicago, which I believe is one of the most prestigious one in the world. And I've also heard this course is extremely popular among students. So can you tell me something about this course and how it relates to the topics of character and virtue?
The course is called Character and Commerce, Practical Wisdom in Economic Life. And it's basically serving as the one ethics course for students who are taking the business track through our economics course program of study, undergraduate program of study, which is the single most popular program of undergraduate study at the University of Chicago. It's a very powerful economics department. And it began with my trying to basically figure out how, as a philosopher with a background in formal economics, I could actually provide some resources for all of those undergraduates who, like any undergraduates, are really interested in trying to think about what matters most to them in life, about their future career paths, about how to relate their economics training to thoughts about how to lead their personal lives, how all that happens. And so I developed the course through a lot of research, basically trying to use readings drawn primarily from economics and business ethics as a way of opening up broad thought about character, moral reasoning, and moral standards for our economics students, these are students who are well schooled in the sort of Milton Friedman understanding of the human person. And so the main thing was to make sure that I could engage them personally and get them personally interested in trying to work out for themselves how it made sense for them to live, and in structuring a course that would allow them to make actual progress in sort of a character education way. So that happened mostly through various pedagogic techniques that are designed to build community, because I think you need community supports for character education generally. And then reflective passes every single week where they took some aspect of the week's reading and tried to bring it home to some area of human experience. It didn't have to be their own, but usually it was their own. So they have a one-page reading assignment every week, which I read, and it comes due on a Thursday so that we don't conflict with anybody's Sabbath. And then I read it and get back to them on Monday in the lecture about what we all said. And that is a really important component of it. And I think a key to a lot of the popularity it has. I taught it last winter to a class of 98 students. And it was incredibly popular. And I'm not teaching it this year, but I'll teach it again next year.
And you find that the concepts of character and virtue resonate with these students?
Deeply. I mean, we start out talking at a more general level about the empirical evidence that, all of us have various standards for ourselves. And there's an enormous body of evidence suggesting that none of us lives up to our own standards very well. So the official track through it all is, what would it take to be the sort of person who lives up to her own standards in these regards? And then lots of discussion of ethical issues, of kinds of ethical concerns connected to almost all aspects of starting, running, or taking part in business. So it works very well. They practice perspective taking, they practice trying to see what it takes to develop moral imagination for themselves and for their future careers. Developing moral imagination is one of the biggest tools, I think, for building character, because it involves learning flexible responses to moral patterns that you recognize in your daily life and getting some actual distance and perspective on those patterns and trying to think how you could engage them more effectively and creatively.
Thank you. Well, you're a jack of so many different trades, Candace. So in addition to this course, you also co-taught a course with psychologists on practical wisdom, or phronesis. So could you tell us something about the different ways in which psychologists and philosophers approach the topic of wisdom, and if and then how you think this gap in research orientation can be bridged?
That's not too hard. Bridging can be difficult, but the difference is not too hard. Basically, when you've got a topic like practical wisdom on the table, philosophers want to understand what that is, what it involves, what are the crucial concepts, how does it all fit together, why is this a unified topic rather than 12 different topics, that kind of thing. So philosophers kind of want to understand what this thing we're trying to describe is. Psychologists want to know how they'd measure it, right? I mean, economists want to know how you'd model it, usually mathematically, but psychologists want to know how on earth you would measure this thing. So the biggest gap tends to happen in conversation because philosophers are concerned that what the psychologists are trying to measure doesn't actually correspond very well with a philosophical understanding of the topic. So that's where you hit the biggest impasse. And the way around it, I think, is basically for philosophers to learn some psychology and for psychologists to be open to philosophers, and then just to collaborate and talk a lot. Because it's in the course of personally working together, I think, that you actually are able, that what can seem like monumental gaps from the outside actually close, because you've got a shared interest in just different approaches to it. So that's, so the co-teaching was actually tremendously useful. I learned so much about contemporary research on wisdom and wisdom-related topics. And I think that they learned about why a philosopher might be worried about moral dilemmic research methods, or about self-reports, or about, I mean, in a way that psychologists might not be, and about how to capture the complexity of wisdom in either its theoretical or its practical guises. I mean, I'm a philosopher. One of the things that's fascinating about practical wisdom and virtue to me is that it's as likely to show itself in what someone would never do as it is to show what somebody does. So the kinds of things that would never even occur to you to do are a nice symptom of your character, actually. Just like the kinds of things you could think about trying is also an index of your character.
Yeah, excellent. But there's a mystery about phronesis or practical wisdom, namely that philosophers have been writing about it for 2,300 years. But until recently, we had no standard conceptualization of this construct and no instruments to measure it. But we've got so many available instruments to measure various other virtues, you know, which have been designed by psychologists, virtues like gratitude or compassion, empathy, and so on. So why has phronesis been neglected in this regard?
I think it's partly because of peculiarities of phronesis that are crucial to the concept. I mean, it is a complex concept. It's not a simple thing. It's not like gratitude or something, which you can think of as easily isolable. Even humility you can think of as a kind of thing you can isolate and study. Honesty, certainly, these kinds of things. But phronesis is supposed to be both regulating the application of all of those other virtues to particular concrete circumstances, and drawing from all those other virtues in its assessment of what's going on. So phronesis is supposed to be both answerable to and governing of the activities of the other virtues. That makes it a much harder thing to isolate and study. And it's why I think philosophers have not been satisfied, for the most part, with most of the efforts on the part of psychologists to come up with constructs for it. It's also an integrative virtue. So it's not just drawing from a bunch of little isolated well springs of experience and affect and thought. It's also trying to integrate those in a way that allows the wise person to respond wisely to concrete particular situations, whatever those might be. So there's not even a characteristic sort of a response that you're expecting from the wise person beyond saying it's wise rather than foolish or rash or something. So I think in those ways, it's actually an unusually difficult one to operationalize. And having operationalized it, there becomes a further set of questions about how you would measure that, even though you've got it broken down into little chunks that seem to give you distinctive areas where you would study.
speaking of breaking the concept into little chunks, the Jubilee Center recently came up with a 4-componential model of phronesis. Any thoughts from you about the credibility and the usefulness of this model?
Well, as you probably know, because I was at various points getting to be engaged with you about it, I actually like the model a lot. I partly like it because of its sort of neo-Aristotelian heritage. I'm a strong neo-Aristotelian thinker myself, sort of more inflected by Thomism than just Aristotle, but, you know, he was a neo-Aristotelian. So I like that aspect of it very much. I like that it seems to, that the 4 components seem to capture really crucial aspects of wisdom that are, you know, sort of perfectly general, and that you would expect to see develop in an integrated way as a student, for example, was growing in wisdom. So all of that I like very, very much. That it includes things like a blueprint function, so that it's asking to see how the various things it's measuring fit into a whole life. I think that's real, in a sense, for what matters in life. I think that's really, really important, that you've got both moral reasoning and emotional regulation in there. Very, very important. I think it's and that you've got a sort of ethical self-image or ethical sense of self in there generally gives you a sort of stable central piece around which these other things can be understood and reflected. I mean, I think it's also nice because I can't imagine studying any of the 4 components in isolation from the others. I mean, what would it mean to have a solid ethical sense of yourself without having a sense of your life as a whole? What would that even mean? Like, you know, snapshot ethics, like you could take a selfie of your character and get something with that. And what would it mean to have an ethical self-image that wasn't also involved in emotional regulation and that wasn't connected to one style of moral reasoning? So my sense is that the instrument and the conceptualization behind it are both things that have to be understood in exactly the kind of integrated way that you need if what you're interested in is phronesis. Those would be the things I love about it.
Thank you, Candace. That's good to hear. Well, these are fascinating topics, and we could obviously continue to talk about them the whole day, but I think I'll leave it here and just thank you for giving us some of your valuable time. I'm sure our viewers are much more and better informed after listening to your answers. So take care and goodbye from all of us in the Jubilee Center.
Goodbye, Kristján. Stay well.
Thank you.